Hey there, friends. Dave Paulides for The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, Season 5, Episode 2, The Review. Just got done watching it. One of the comments from last week was, Dave, I really can't watch this because I don't see any data showing that anything's happening there. What? These scientists are about nothing but data. Machines are rolling, films rolling, videos rolling, drones rolling. There's data everywhere. And they show you the instruments as they're picking it up. So someone either doesn't have their critical thinking cap on, or their thinking cap isn't working, but there's all kinds of data they're feeding to you. You have to pay attention to what's going on. They started off this week with something I think fascinating. They showed a segment from last year where on camera there's a UFO UAP coming at an angle. It enters the Mesa and then it comes out further down the Mesa, same shape, same look, same sort of speed. Now, many of you will say, well, how could it enter a rocky mesa, a solid rock, and come out later on in the same shape, size, and speed? Good question. I'm going to take you back. You might have heard the story many years ago, but I'm going to tell you it because it directly applies. An acquaintance was in Sedona, Arizona. And they were taken to this specific location. And it was a hike that she said the person took her on a roundabout way in because they didn't want her to find it again. But they took her up on the side of this cliff, rocky cliff, solid rock. And they sit down. And she said that the other person says, here, hold on to this. And what it was a piece of rope with something at the end. And he said, twirl it above your head. Something similar to a bull roar. And as she's spinning it, she says it's making this woo, woo, woo sound. And he says, just keep spinning it. And she said she did it for about 4 or 5 minutes. And then suddenly, these little orb type things come directly out of the rock and start spinning above them. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because I've heard this from super credible people in the past. Now, this lady said that this went on for a while. They looked at him. They couldn't believe what they're saying. The other guy knew that this would happen. And then he said, if you want him to go away, just stop. So she stops, and fairly soon, these little white things flying above their head go back into the rock. She says, what was that? He goes, those are UFOs. Apparently, they didn't want you. That's what they said. That's what it's like. And she laughed and she goes, oh, you're just kidding. He goes, So, is it possible for these little UFOs, UAPs to go into rocks? Well, all up and down the Cascades, from Mount Adams to Mount Rainier, these have been reported going into mountains. This is not new, folks. So, it's not like they're saying anything that people in the know haven't heard before. So what they decided to do is do a test. Between the point where that UFO they caught on film was going into the mesa and the point where it was coming out of the mesa. And what Travis wanted to figure out is, could they send a signal through rock from one end of the mesa to the other, and if it could be picked up on instruments at that other end. So that was the test that they start to set up. And then they break away, and they introduce a person I've never seen on the show before, a man named Bob Woodruff, a biologist for the Hutchings Museum. And some of the caretakers had 2 birds that they wanted the biologist to look at. One was a starling that had been dead for a couple weeks. And Ben said, well, it's kind of unusual. There's no maggots on it, and the brain is gone. He says he's never seen that. He says after 7 days, the feathers never normally come out, and they haven't. And both birds seemed both intact. The other bird was a grosbeak. Its eyes were intact, its guts were intact, and that usually is the first to decompose, he said. He said there's many scavengers in the area, but they haven't been doing their job at Skinwalker Ranch, and it's not decomposing at the normal rate. And he thought it was odd, very odd, and that the brain on the one bird was gone. It's pretty weird. And then they go over to the spot where this cow had died. They didn't know why it died, but it had been dead for 6 months, and it was decomposed, and its rib cage was sticking up in the air. And then the biologist found that in one of the ribs, there was a tooth mark that broke through the bone. And he stated that there isn't an animal that he knows of in Utah that could break that bone and penetrate it with a tooth. And he says, but it made a hole. It didn't shatter the bone. And he said, even another animal like a wolf, if they had done that, would have broken their tooth or shattered the bone. And again, he said there's no animals in Utah that could have done that. Fascinating. Now they go back to the experiment. They called it the in and out experiment. It was from the east field, and it came out near the area of the triangle. And Travis was going to broadcast at 1.6 gigahertz at the out point, and then Eric was going to be at the in point where it was hopefully going to come out. And then at the same time, they have their drone expert that transmits GPS and records LiDAR is going to go over this area simultaneously. Well, this is bizarre, before the experiment even starts, Travis is sitting in front of a spectrum analyzer, which shows the waves that he's going to transmit. And all of a sudden, he starts receiving transmissions at 1.6 gigahertz. And after a short while, he has 2 signals. And he stated it's as though one was communicating with the other. And they showed it. Now think about this. What would be the chances that he would just start up the spectrum analyzer and would just a happenstance catch these? Very odd. It's more likely, and I've heard this before, is that things at the ranch, whatever entity this is, knows what you're going to do before you even do it. So before Travis even started the experiment, the entity got involved and was shooting this at him. Now, as Travis is talking about this, one of the security guards says, yeah, it almost looks like it's an SOS message. And to an idiot like me, I would have said the same thing because that's what it looked like. Travis said, no, it's almost like an encrypted SOS message. Well, that's interesting. An encrypted SOS message. I wouldn't even know what that's supposed to look like. But what it looked like on the screen is a series of dots and dashes running parallel to one another at locations where one would stop, the other would begin. And that's why Travis said it appeared as though it was communicating. And Travis is talking about this as they're ready to start their own experiment. And this is going on. And he said that the signals were similar to what they picked up at Homestead 2 a couple years ago. Now I'm going to give you a little inside scoop. Travis was interviewed on another show a few months ago. And he let the cat out of the bag that he and the researchers at the ranch picked up a direct communication from the entity to them. And they're going to expose it later in the show. So sit on the edge of your seats for that one. But you could kind of tell that some type of communication was happening here. I don't know anything more about it because that's all he could say at the time on this show. So the experiment starts. They put up the LiDAR drone that's transmitting its GPS coordinates. And the drone had been programmed to fly this direct route from where the message was starting to where it was ending. Right off the bat, the drone has trouble communicating with the operator. And then at one point, the signal to the drone completely stopped. And then on their screen, where they could see the GPS being transmitted by the drone, the transmission points stopped and were interrupted several times. Similar to the helicopter last week. But this can't happen. You see, that's impossible. And the drone operator, who's like a super pro, who owns his own company and does super specialty work, said, that's never happened. He doesn't even know how it could happen. But all along, even going into past years, GPS has been interrupted at various times. Now remember, GPS is gotten from a satellite. The satellite, you transmit from, let's say, your helicopter to the satellite transmits back to you and you got it. So something is happening. When they lose the complete signal, the drone starts to come back. Something was missing on the GPS. They couldn't explain it. And the signal to Travis started again, just as the drone was going through the zone where they recorded that big spire in the middle last year. Just as when the drone went through that, it completely shut off the communications, and then that automatically sends the drone back to its point of origin. This is in the same area where the petroglyph is on the Mesa, depicting a portal. And then the GPS got totally interrupted over that spire area. Now, that portal that was identified there was this circular object on a rock. Starts small, bigger, bigger, bigger. And these have been found at many locations throughout the Southwest. I've seen one personally twice. And when I was finally told what it meant, it made complete sense because so many wacky things happen out there. So Travis again starts transmitting with his device at the exit point of the Mesa where they saw this UAP come out. Eric at the other end picks up the message, which startles everybody. And Eric says, this shouldn't happen. The transmission device is so low power that it shouldn't have the ability to go even partially through these rocks, and it went all the way, which to them indicated there's some type of pathway through the Mesa that they don't understand. So the RF generator that Travis was using shouldn't be able to do that. Well, they start up the drone again, doing LiDAR scans. Another glitch in the GPS. The GPS actually showed, instead of the drone going straight up and then over, showing it going at an angle to the south, which it never did. Everyone saw it, it just didn't do it. So not only was the GPS glitched, it showed error messages going even a different direction, which is completely unbelievable. And this had happened twice at the same spot. At one point, they lost the drone totally on their equipment. And then when the drone reached the end of its trip along the mesa, it started doing almost circles, which it wasn't programmed to do. It was programmed to go to this point and then turn around and come back. And it did 5 or 6 of these very odd, elongular circles, and the drone operator couldn't understand what was happening. It had never done that before. You see, the software in the drone doesn't have the ability to think for itself. It does how it's programmed. And you program the drone to go out to a certain point, and it has a fail-safe mechanism. If anything starts to go wrong, it immediately comes back to the point it started, you. But when it goes out to the point and it's programmed to come back, there is no ability in the software for it to start doing these circles. How it started doing that is the $10 million question that nobody could figure out. Travis lost his data at that point, his data transmission. At the same time, the drone came back online and they could see it coming back to its point of origin. And when it starts coming back to its point of origin, a few seconds later, Travis goes back online monitoring a signal. Eric and Travis had multiple conversations about how is it possible that the RF signal can penetrate all of this rock. And for a physicist like Travis to ask the question, there isn't an easy answer. And Travis, in answering almost his own questions, stated that the Mesa is acting like an antenna or a waveguide. And I will remind you, a couple years ago, when I first started doing these reviews, I have a very good friend who's a physicist named Bruce Maccabee. We talked about this at length, and he watches the show, and he's been a physicist for the US government and for MUFON. And he said that he believes that whatever's in that triangular area, he thinks it's some type of giant underground antenna. Maybe not an antenna like you and I think with, metal offshoots and this and that. He says, but there's something transmitting and picking up things there. That was his theory. And when Travis just said that, I went right to Bruce. He's one of the smartest men I've ever known. Always the best thing about these shows isn't necessarily what they do on the experiments. It's the data analysis by Eric and Travis the next day. And I sincerely doubt it is the next day, because to find the things Eric finds would take me 3 or 4 days of looking at these screens that he looks at. But they're phenomenal. So they get back into a room, and over the entire time they're doing this, they have high-speed video going on that's picking up what's in the sky and along the Mesa ground level. So they're looking at the triangle, and the orb, an orb, like almost a round orb, is detected going through the area near the time the GPS drone is getting errors. And the question, was the orb responsible for the errors? So the drone is flying along, it's getting error messages. At the same time, this orb beneath the drone is going by on camera. They picked it up. And the drone picked up this high-speed orb. It was unreal. Second event is it's flying along, and down near ground level, this long, thin, tube-like device, at very high speed, they catch it just cutting through the frame quickly and going straight into the Mesa. How does that happen, Ollie? We've talked about these long spears before. Ron Moorhead and his wife saw one at the Sierra camp going through camp. So what's the difference between a circular orb and a tubular orb? I have no idea. And then Eric found a third event. A white orb in the sky moving fast. When they hone onto it, it's rectangular. And they find 3 other UAP UFOs around this thing as it's going along. And it was between the east field and the triangle. Much faster than the others. At one point it changed direction and slowed down. They talked their way through it. Well, it couldn't be a bird. It couldn't be a drop on the camera, a water drop. It couldn't be this. They just said, what is it? Remember Missing 411, The Hunted, where the hunter saw a cube UFO on the ground. A cube. This is a rectangle. Number 4 that Eric found was another orb that they saw flying along, makes an S-type turn, makes a loop, and comes back. And in Travis's words, it was as though it was making a final approach for landing the way it turned and came back around. One of the reasons Skinwalker Ranch fascinates me is because of the research that NIDS under Bigelow did. They had theorized that there was a traversable wormhole between parallel dimensions that could be at the ranch. And there were many reasons why this was theorized. Well, as we were ending the show, they showed coming attractions of next week. And they showed some footage, and Travis said, it looks like a traversable wormhole. Giddy up. Now, a traversable wormhole between different dimensions. Quantum physics, quantum mechanics says that this is entirely possible. And many of the almost every theoretical physicist believes it's true. And when the original NIDS researchers were on the ranch, they had seen things that they described as dinosaur-like. And the previous owners had seen things at the ranch that were dinosaur-like. But they never found any evidence of them being there other than they were seen and there were some unusual tracks. Well, how would those dinosaur-like things get here and then not be here? Well, under the theory of traversable wormholes, if we could be living here while over here is an entirely different dimension with an entirely different lifespan and lifeline and year. But if there was a connection between those two, then these things over here could come over here. And in theory, things over here may go over there. But how do you get back? That's the question. Now, when Travis made that statement on next week's coming attractions, it totally clicked for me. Because I knew what NIDS had found before and their comments before. Now, one thing I wish that the researchers would do. Let me talk about the Zodiac Killer. Yeah, Dave, how could that be related? Hold your taters. So, in the Zodiac Killer case, happened in San Francisco. I followed that thing daily. I was entranced by it. Why? Because the killer was brilliant. Yeah, he was. He came up with a way to encrypt his communications that he sent the Chronicle. It's like he was just screwing with them daily. He would write something and nobody could figure out what he was writing except maybe through symbols and things that he would write. Look it up online. Zodiac Killer messages. Well, eventually, it wasn't solved by the FBI. It wasn't solved by the CIA, who has a huge encryption service. No. It was somebody just like you and me who had an interest in it and took it on for years and figured it out. And why do I bring that up? Because Travis said during the show that the transmissions he was looking at were almost like encrypted, what was the word? SOS signals. You know what I wish they'd do? Is I wish that they would put up those encrypted SOS signals that the audience was looking at. Put them up and give a shot to all the amateur researchers out there to see if they could figure out what the encryption is. Why is that important? Well, first of all, Travis thought that it was two messages communicating with each other. I tend to think it might have been, but it was also placed there for Travis to see it. The timing was too perfect. And if he was meant to see it, maybe we were meant to decipher it. Just a thought from an average guy. I greatly appreciate you being here. There's going to be a lot of comments. So please comment and read the comments that other people put up there. I have a lot of brilliant followers, and I learn something from you guys all the time. And if you're interested in my books, Missing 411, you can get them on our website, NA like North America, NABigfootsearch.com. Be safe. Paulides out.